Hey there, how's it going? Let me ask you a question. Is it better to be a shadow or is it better to be an immortal? An ultimate question, and today we're going to try to answer that. Let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Nemo. Welcome to another Diablo Immortal video. Today we're going to be talking about Immortals versus Shadows versus Adventurers. There are three different faction choices that you can pick when you're playing Diablo Immortal. Each one of these has positives, has negatives, and really it's hard to choose. Today in this video, I'm going to present you with all of the facts, with everything that you need to know, and you will be able to make that choice yourself. And of course, at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you what I think is best. Remember, it's going to be chaptered, so you can skip around anytime you like a via those chapters. While you're down there, make sure to smash that like button, hit the subscribe, and stay tuned to the latest Diablo Immortal content. First, let's give you a high-level overview of Immortals, Shadows, and Adventurers. Now remember, I have detailed videos. In fact, I have whole playlists for you up top talking about Immortals, Shadows, all of the activities, how it all works. If you don't understand how the cycle of strife works or each one of these factions, videos for you up top, you definitely want to make sure you check those out. Now, a high-level overview of like the story, the lore, again, videos for you up top, but generally the Shadows and the Immortals are fighting each other for control over the Eternal Crown. Eternal Crown is basically what gives you power in Sanctuary, and you need that power to protect Sanctuary against Hell itself. So the Immortals are the godly protectors of Sanctuary, while the Shadows are the folks that are basically making sure that the Immortals are up to the task, making sure that they can do what they need to do. There's 500 Immortals, there's an unlimited amount of Shadows. So there's that battle between the factions, but they're not equal. There's only 500 spots for the Immortals. So sometimes you can get into the server and you might not have a spot left. You might not be able to become an Immortal. As far as the Shadows go, you're always going to be able to be a Shadow as long as you participate in something called the Shadow Lottery. So now there are major differences between both of the factions, not just in the sheer numbers, right? There's 500 Immortals and unlimited amount of Shadows. But there are other differences in the daily tasks of what the Shadows and the Immortals do. But remember, the Immortals are the godly protectors of Sanctuary. They're the folks that are going to be basically in charge of making sure the Sanctuary stays alive. They're the protectors, right? They wear the crowns. They have the leader and the lieutenants, and they go into Keon's ordeal. We'll talk about all of that in a minute. But that's what you are as an Immortal. So a lot of the tasks that you do as an Immortal, they're called Immortal Dailies, by the way, are focused around that. They're focused around Sanctuary. You might have to do a challenge rift. You will do a couple of bounties, usually 2 you have to do. You'll do upgrading a gem and maybe salvaging an item. You definitely will do a dungeon or 2. Those are your daily tasks. That's normally what you will be doing. Participating in Keon's ordeal, checking out the Wall of Honor, looking at the statue, small tasks like that, doing a challenge rift. Basically kind of doing what you normally do when you play Diablo Immortal, right? You do some stuff, you do a dungeon, you're like clearing out mobs and monsters, you're doing some bounties, you're like making sure the Sanctuary is cool, making sure that the monsters are down, and you're doing your daily work. Well, an Immortal is basically that. You're doing a little bit less work than the Shadow, because when you're a Shadow versus being in the Ascension Hall, there's a big difference between the Immortals and the Shadows in that sense as well. An Immortal, again, is godly. They will hang out in the Ascension Hall, which is right there up top in West March. They have statues. They have all kinds of awesome music and beautiful lighting, and they're very godly and all of that. When you're a Shadow, you're quite opposite. In fact, you hang out in the Quarter of Whispers, which is down in the basement of West March. You're a Shadow. You're on the low. There are rats there. It's a very different environment. It's more, it's more dark, it's more shadowy. So when you're a Shadow, what you're doing is messing with the Immortals. Remember, so a lot of your daily work is kind of focused on that. You have something called a contract. A contract is something that you pick up from the bartender. It's a weekly thing. There is a cap on them, but you pick them up and you go out in the world and you mess with the Immortals. They're kind of little storyline missions that are focused on messing with the Immortals. Now, when you're doing it, of course, there are a bunch of other stuff that you can do. Sometimes there are missions that are like, they might be in a dungeon. So you might have to go retrieve something that's actually in a dungeon versus having to do the dungeon itself. But most of the time, all of the things that you're doing in the contracts are based on messing with the Immortals. It's kind of cool. I really like the missions. It's much different than being an Immortal. When you're an Immortal, you're doing a challenge rift. You're going to go do a dungeon. You're going to salvage an item. You're going to upgrade a gem. You're going to do the stuff that you normally do when you're playing Diablo Immortal in the West March. When you're a Shadow, you're down there in the basement. You're messing with the Immortals. So you're doing things that, like, if you were just to be an Immortal, you wouldn't see. Like little contracts, little side missions. They're kind of cool. I really like them. They also give you a lot of good rewards. They give you some legendaries. They give you large scraps, so you need those. They're very important to upgrade your gear. You get the Knight of the Living Shard, the Shard of the Living Knight. Why can I ever say that? The Shard of the Living Knight. It's like so hard to say. Try to say that 3 times. Get a bunch of those, which helps you go in and raid the vault, which, by the way, is another activity within a shadow rank that you do. Remember, when you're an Immortal, you have something called an Immortal Vault. This is what protects your stuff. This like holds a bunch of gear for you. This has a Sencha in it. There's a bunch of stuff that you need in order to be an Immortal. Also, it holds honor and gold. This vault, at the end of the week, if it's not rated, it gets distributed against all the Immortals. So one of the positives for being an Immortal is you get something called the vault, right? So you get gold and honor delivered to you once a week. And you, if you're high enough on the rank, you can actually pick maybe a piece of gear, a piece of legendary out of the vault that you'll be able to get as well. So once a week, as an Immortal, you get some honor, you get some gold, and you get up to 3 legendaries depending on your contribution ranks and etc. Again, if you need to know more about the Immortals or how that works, I'll link a video for you up top. But you're basically doing a bunch of dailies. Those dailies give you something called Essentia. You take the Essentia, put it in, and contribute it to the Immortal Reign. That gives you better rank, and that rank gives you a little bit better rewards at the end of the week. All focused on the fact that you need to keep the Essentia and the gear in this vault. Now, the vault is something that both factions can actually access, right? So the Immortals are protecting the vault, while the Shadows are trying to raid the vault. So this Knight of the Shard of the Living Knight, it's a ticket into the raid the vault activity on the Shadow side. So basically, you're doing a bunch of contracts. You have a chance of getting this shard. If you get the shard, you can get a couple of your buddies together, Shadow buddies, and then you can go in and raid the vault. And this is, of course, the Raid the Vault activity. Again, I'll link that for you up top. Is a PvE activity that turns into PvP. If there's an alarm that's rang, that's when the Immortals decide to come in. The Shadows are in there, and that's when the fight begins. Remember, the Shadows are trying to raid the vault and take it down because they can get gear out of it. They can get Essentia, gold, honor. And if they're able to do that, that's going to prevent the Immortals from getting stronger. And there are a variety of reasons why the Immortals would want to get stronger, but at the end of the day, they want to keep the Essentia in the vault because they need it to open up something called Keon's Ordeal. Keon's Ordeal is another activity that you can do if you're an Immortal Elite. In fact, only 48 players out of all of the Immortals are chosen to go into Keon's Ordeal, where you can basically defend Sanctuary against Hell. There's 4 bosses, there's a bunch of, it's a really cool fight. I'll link a video for you up top, gives you all the details and actual footage of the fight itself. But when you get in there, if you're able to beat all those 4 bosses as an Immortal, you get something called Diadessa's Blessing. Diadessa's Blessing is an activity that you need to refresh. Basically, you need to do Keon's Ordeal once a week and beat it in order to keep Diadessa's Blessing on the Immortal side. If you have Diadessa's Blessing, when you're doing Elder Rifts, you have extra gear and things like that that get deposited into the vault. So the vault now holds more stuff if you, as the Immortals, have the Diadessa's Blessing. Now, if you can't beat Keon's Ordeal or refresh it every 7 days, the Diadessa's Blessing will switch and go over to the Shadows. And of course, the vault will get filled that way. But long story short, you need Essentia in order to access Keon's Ordeal as an Immortal. The Shadows raiding the vault prevent you from doing that if they're able to get the Essentia out. And that's kind of how it works. So as an Immortal, you're protecting Sanctuary, you're doing your regular stuff. You have to do basically 2 bounties to fill your dailies. You got to do a bunch of other stuff. You might have a Keon's Ordeal or raid the vault as an activity in your Immortal dailies. But all of those dailies, if you complete them, they're able to give you a raw Essentia. That raw Essentia is what you contribute to the Reign, and that allows you to progress the Immortals as a whole together more, and it also allows you to get better rating, which of course gives you better loot in the Immortal Vault if the Shadows don't overtake it. But remember, if you're a shadow on the other side, you're doing your contracts, you're doing your Path of Bloods, which is Path of Blood is actually, I'll link it for you as well if you want to know, but Path of Blood is like a benchmark. There's an activity for you that you could do. It's there's like floors, and you can just go in there, kill the boss, and continue and go from floor to floor. It's a really cool activity, again, just part of the shadows. And then, of course, raid the vault. And the whole thing at the end leads to something called the Rite of Exile. And that's ultimately the fight between the Immortals and the Shadows. If the right, if the right stages are reached, if there's enough dark houses, because as a shadow, you can get together with your other shadow friends, create something called a dark house, and go take the Immortals down. But generally speaking, there's a positive and a negative to both factions. When you are an Immortal, you're able to go in, you're able to do your daily tasks around Sanctuary, you're able to get extra rewards. As an Immortal, you get delivered honor and gold to you every week. You have a chance for a legendary. You have more activities. A lot of the times when you're doing dailies and turn them in, you get large scraps for it. You get a bunch of legendary gear as well. There's more chance to get legendary gear as an Immortal, but technically speaking, an Immortal member is not as good as being as an Immortal Elite, because the Immortal Elite will be able to participate in something called the Chaos Ordeal. The higher you are in the Immortals, the more benefits you get. In fact, as the Immortal Leader and the 4 Lieutenants, you get buffs. You get special buffs that you can activate. The group buffs that are really nice, but only 5 people out of all of the Immortals get them. The other thing too, the major difference between the Immortals and the Shadows, especially when you just turn Immortal, is the Shadows have, if you get high enough in rank, have really good modifiers. They have over 30% damage and defense boost just for being a Shadow if you reach the Whisper status. The highest rank in the Shadows gives you the really high damage and defense boost. You cannot reach that as an Immortal. In fact, as an Immortal, you start off with nothing. You have to progress your reign, and the higher you go in the reign in your ages, the more you're able to kind of give or offer your members a little modifiers, a little boost to their damage and defense. But as a Shadow, you can easily get your damage and defense boost modifiers are much higher than an Immortal. In fact, that's kind of one of the major differences between being a Shadow and an Immortal. It's one of the things that I feel like a lot of people miss. You know, like when I turned from Shadow to Immortal, and I went into my first challenge rift, I was like, wow, I feel a difference, because the 30+% of the damage, the 30+% of defense was completely gone, and I was left almost naked. You know, you feel a major difference when you go from Shadow to being an Immortal. Now, there are a lot of major differences between being a Shadow and Immortal, but one of the ones that you notice is the boost to your damage and your shield, the modifiers, right? You get plus 30% if you're highest Whisper to your damage and to your shield, basically. You get plus 30% boost as a Shadow, as the highest level Shadow. When you're an Immortal, you can't even get close to that. In fact, when you just join Immortality or first rank Immortals, the lowest ones, they don't get any modifiers at all. They don't get any boosts whatsoever. In fact, when you go from being a highest level Shadow to just joining Immortality, you notice a major difference. You are able to survive a lot less. You get a lot weaker because of those numbers. The 30+% when it comes to damage and your shield, your own defense. Defense and offense is where it's at, and this is a big boost. Now, when you become an Immortal, you're able to eventually get, I believe, to 10 or 15%. As you progress the Immortal reign and get higher and higher. But generally speaking, a Shadow has much better stats than the Immortals, even at the highest levels. Now, when you're an Immortal Leader or you're the Immortal Lieutenant, that's different, but there's only 5 of those people. That's basically, there's a lot of difference between being an Immortal and a Shadow. But you notice, one of the big differences, being a Shadow, you're all about yourself. Being an Immortal really is all about the reign. And when you're an Immortal member, I almost feel like you're a foot soldier. Like, I'll talk more about my own opinion about what's better, being an Immortal or a Shadow. There are some differences, and there's some really major things that you got to watch out for if you're choosing Immortality versus being a Shadow. I'll talk to you more about that at in the opinion section of this video. But at the end of the day, as an Immortal, like I said, you're a protector of Sanctuary. You're doing your regular stuff. It's a bit easier to get some gold, to get some honor, and chance for some legendaries as well. You can possibly participate in Chaos Ordeal if you're part of the Lucky 48. And of course, if you're a leader or the lieutenants, you get some extra buffs on top of the, you get a bunch of other stuff too. Like you get cosmetics and things like that. It's kind of cool. But at the end of the day, when you're a shadow, you get those buffs. You get the individual buffs that are super important. You can easily, as a single shadow, take down any single immortal by yourself. It's really a big positive. Now, when you're a shadow, you have to do more work. I mean, depending really if you want to overthrow the immortals and push and go towards the Rite of Exile, I bet you a lot of the times, I wonder if being a shadow, I wonder if some of the professional players or some of the players that, might want to go competitive will just want to stay shadow. Like, I wonder if people won't even want to turn the Cycle of Strife, right? Because you can stay at that 30+% damage boost and defense boost modifiers, and that's an interesting point. I didn't even think about that. Now, what about adventurers? Think about it. There's also a whole other angle to this. What if you don't want to be an immortal or a shadow? You just say, man, I don't want to do any of that stuff. I don't want to get involved with politics or etc. You can get your own boost. Because Immortal has Diablo Immortal has 3 different factions, really, if you think about it. You have the Shadows, the Immortals, then you have the Adventurers. These are the folks who are not involved at all. And in the recent update, that's right, we had a closed alpha update. They changed a few things and made this really important. This is something that I feel was definitely needed in Immortal. So basically what's happening now is an Adventurer gets extra Scoria. You get Scoria now as an Adventurer for doing bounties. So normally, one of the things that I've noticed, right, when I turned Shadow, I wasn't able to go to the Honor Merchant anymore and buy my Scoria. Why do you need Scoria? Scoria, you're able to take it, bring it to Charcy, upgrade it to Hellfire Scoria by giving it gold, and then taking that and upgrading your Heliquary. Heliquary is a PvE endgame activity for Immortal that's sort of tied into the Adventurers now. The Heliquary allows you to boost your stats, your passive stats, your defense and offense ratings. It allows you to do a bunch of other stuff. It even gives you cool modifiers and percentages and a bunch of other special abilities in challenge rifts and other things within, Sanctuary and actually West March and a bunch of other activities, right? If you really think about it, the Heliquary has 4 spots in it. These 4 spots you can modify and change. It's basically another 4 equipment slots that you can add special things into if you kill certain bosses in the world out there. Now, Heliquary is a little bit confusing, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, I have a full video up top describing it and showing you how to kill the first boss. At the end of the day, the Heliquary is going to allow you to put a bunch of other stuff on your character. It's also going to allow you to boost your offensive and defensive rating. And when you're an adventurer, you're now able to get a lot more Scoria. Before the update, you were able to get Scoria from the Honor Merchant, right? So, hey, daily you can get +6 Scoria versus everybody else, because any other way, if you're just a shadow or you're an immortal, you can get Scoria by completing bounties, but they're locked to that. So you get 12 bounties a day, you get an X amount of Scoria, and you have to wait till the next day to get more Scoria by doing the bounties. As the adventurer, you can go to the Honor Merchant and use some of that honor to buy extra 6 Scoria a day. So I thought that's kind of cool. That gives the adventurer a little bit of an advantage because they're able to climb the Heliquary a little bit faster. Well, after the update, now there's a whole other side to this which will give you a lot more Scoria. In fact, adventurers now get extra Scoria, not just by the Honor Merchant because they're able to purchase it, but they also get Scoria just for completing bounties. Extra Scoria for completing bounties on top of what you get normally. So this will give you a major boost in the Heliquary and how to push. So an adventurer also has a really nice positive in Immortal that the Shadows and the Immortals do not have. So there you go. There's a whole bunch of positives and negatives about being a Shadow, about being an Immortal, about being an adventurer. Which one are you going to be? Are you going to be a Shadow? Are you going to be an Immortal? Or are you going to stay an adventurer and just do the Heliquary? Well, there's a lot of different choices. There's a lot of things to consider. Now, this is just, I'm scratching the surface here. There's a lot more. If I missed some stuff, if you're playing the game and you're like, hey, Nemo, there's also this, let me know down below in the comments. So in my opinion, whether I would want to be a Shadow or an Immortal, that's a really tough one because there are a lot of factors that are involved in that. At first, I'd probably be an adventurer for a while and push my Heliquary, try to get a little bit of the boost on it because it's kind of cool. I really like the idea of the adventurers having a little bit of an edge when it comes to the Shadows and the Immortals, plus the adventurers having an edge in things like the challenge rifts, right? Because a lot of from what I'm noticing, a lot of the things that you can add into your heliquary give you boosts in things like challenge rifts, which in general will give you boost in the leaderboards of the challenge rifts. That's kind of cool as well. I think about that. You can get more rewards that way, possibly get an advantage over both the Immortals and the Shadows in the challenge rifts if you're an adventurer versus being a Shadow or an Immortal. That's a good positive. There are a lot of other positives too. As far as the Shadow, I think it's the most positive, right? Because one, there's a lot more stuff that you can do. Generally, you can do contracts, Path of Blood, raid the vault. It's a lot easier because all of the Shadows can participate in every one of those activities. You can't do the Rite of Exile unless you start a Dark House and go in and do all of that, which you totally could if you wanted to. I think a Shadow is a lot more accessible. All of the activities within the Shadows are a lot more accessible to everyone versus the Immortals. Also, the Shadows get better buffs. By far, 32+% on your Whisper 4 rank is much better than the Immortals at the highest level, and it takes a long time for the Immortals to establish the reign and push to that highest level in order to get those other buffs. So as a Shadow, you're going to be stronger than any other Immortal, unless you're facing the leader and the lieutenants and all that together, because they have their own individual buffs. In general speaking, the Shadow is much better as far as the buffs go. That's kind of how it works. Now, immortality is better because you get honor delivered to you. You get gold delivered to you. It's easier to get legendary gear because you can pick it from the vault if you can keep it in the vault. Because remember, the Shadows will be raiding it. So there's a lot of that. But at the same time, immortality is also not a good thing if it's not ran right. In my opinion, immortality has to be the immortal leader himself and the lieutenants. They have to be truly selfless. The immortal leader has to be not about himself, okay? It's very, very important, but the Immortals have to be all about the reign and the Immortal and the leadership, but the leadership and the Immortal have to be about the Immortals. That's kind of how it works. You'll have to make sure that you include everybody. You as the leader have to be the representative for the faction. You have to be literally descended for Keon himself. You are responsible for Sanctuary. You're not going to be all about yourself. You shouldn't, I don't think that top players are just trying to grind to be the best in the game or push or have the best gear or about themselves are not going to be really good leaders. And that in general will create lots of toxicity and politics within the cycle, within the Immortals. And that's something I don't want to participate in. So if it's something like that within the server, I'm not sure I'd want to be an Immortal. In fact, they'll probably make me push me to be more of a Shadow so I can take them down, because being an Immortal is not just about themselves. In my opinion, being an Immortal is about protecting Sanctuary, about a bigger thing, about a cause versus just you. Hey, that's just my opinion. But if the leadership is good, if the Immortal himself is about that, whatever, maybe I would want to join the Immortals and help them out and kind of be in that, because it is a little bit easier. There's a little less things to do. But at the same time, you could just say, forget all that and just be an adventurer, right? Do your thing. Get the bounties, get the scoria, get the heliquary. Be good. Which one do you want to be? It's a tough question. Let me know down below. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.